uh, we had sort of brief introductions, but why don't we just go around very quickly? I'll call your names from what I see on the screen. Julie, you want to say your name and where you are and who you are, who you're with?
Yes. So I'm Julie Philippek. I live in Appleton, Wisconsin, in northeastern Wisconsin. And I work with a number of people who are connectors in their neighborhoods in a few communities around here through a program I lead called Neighborhood Partners.
Matt Johnson. Matt,
there we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Sorry, I lost my button there. Yeah, so Matt Johnson, I'm in Wichita, Kansas. We have a nonprofit here in Wichita that is called the Neighboring Movement, and we work in the Soci neighborhood in Wichita, encouraging neighbors to get to know each other, but also on a neighborhood level, exploring asset-based community development.
All right, and Lori?
I'm Lori Wagner. I live in Denmark, and I'm with Neighborhood Partners. I'm the community connector there. And Denmark is just a little south of Green Bay.
Great. Lori, I can't, there we go. Couldn't quite see your full picture. Vicki.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Vicki Bokelman. I work with Julie Philippek with Neighborhood Partners, but I'm also the neighborhood connector in Jefferson Park neighborhood, Menasha, Wisconsin.
Okay, and says C. Evanson.
Yeah, Chris Evanson. I'm part of the Jefferson Park neighborhood organization here in Menasha. Former attorney, but now I'm just a musician. So I work with Julie on some projects.
You've gone to the higher levels of society.
That's right.
Sydney, are you?
Yeah, hi, I'm Sydney, and I am, like Matt, I am in Wichita with the Neighboring Movement.
All right. I think that's everybody excepting for our leaders in this discussion. So let me give a quick background. In Edmonton, Canada, is an initiative called the Abundant Community Initiative. And it probably is the largest scale effort to connect people at the block level any place in North America. And it has grown and grown and have several years experience now in engaging in a process of contacting neighbors and beginning the process of connecting them. So who we have with us in order of presentation are first off, Howard Lawrence, the miracle man who started this all on his own. And it is now, Howard, how many neighborhoods do you think you have connectors in by now?
Can't hear you.
I hear you.
You're muted, yeah.
I'm going to say 60. Thanks for that. Yeah, I'm going to say 60, but maybe 70. 60
or 70. All right, great. And so he's going to give us a brief introduction to the organization itself. And then our primary purpose is to hear from two other people. Penny Tucker, who is a longtime connector, somebody who has been involved at the ground floor and doing the connecting process within the Abundant Community Initiative. And so we've asked her to tell us about what she knows about being a connector. And we know she's a very effective one. So she's going to share what she knows with us. Then she'll be followed by Karen Wilk. And Karen is a person who is a part of the organization, focusing on identifying new connectors, preparing them to take on the task, and supporting them after they are selected. So we're going to go in that order. I think we have only an hour, although we could lap over if people had the time. And the issue is whether or not we have time for questions. And because I think it's so important for us to get the information in, I'm going to propose that what we do is we listen to all three and then open up for questions, so we can make sure that we hear everything they have to offer and not get lost in questions between them. So with that, let me begin by introducing Howard Lawrence. And Howard has moved from being the initiator of this movement to holding a position with neighborhood responsibilities with the City of Edmonton itself. He's become official. And so give us a basic framework so people can understand what ACI is at this point in terms of its structure.
I have to report too, John, that moving to the city hasn't ruined me. I know that's been their concern, but no, I'm still good.
I wasn't worried.
So the basic structure, I want to just quickly say that the fundamental structure is identifying somebody on each block as a block connector, and you're going to hear about that. That continues to be my passion, and even this week, just having the joy of connecting my own block, finding new and welcoming new neighbors, even some that some thought were suspect or sketchy, welcoming them to the whole block. It was just a blast. Included in that household was a 9-year-old young girl. And so to think, wow, we get to parent her as well. So passion. Also this week, I went for a walk with our neighborhoods, new neighborhood connector, and you're going to hear about that individual, the person who's the block connector finder. So really driven by passion and shared with others who are doing the same thing in what we call a community of practice. Abundant Community calls it a table for connectors. The book, The Abundant Community, calls it a table for connectors. And that table has continued to expand beyond my neighborhood to other neighborhoods, to other neighborhood connectors, like both Penny and Karen. And together, using ABCD principles, particularly as they were articulated in the book, Abundant Community, we work together, we put those principles together, we put the principles into the pot of practice among many practitioners in Edmonton, and came up with a practice that John mentioned called Abundant Community Initiative. Our municipality now calls it Abundant Community Edmonton. Some neighborhoods call it Abundant Community Highlands or Abundant Community Belgravia or Abundant Community Windsor Park, so they'll actually name it after their neighborhood, which we really encourage so that they own it. And the basic principles that we derived from the principles of ABCD, articulating Abundant Community and filtered through all of these practices, involve connecting at the block level, fundamentally creating a group at the block. So there's disconnected humans at the block level. Our first goal is to make them a group, an association. Secondarily, then, we would love it if every citizen in our neighborhood found another group to participate in or belong to. And so that might be a knitting group, a wine tasting group, a social justice group. So that's the basic framework, and the City of Edmonton sees the multiple benefits of neighboring, from bylaw enforcement to disaster preparedness, to raising children, to caring for seniors in distress, sees all the many, I would say we have 20 articulated benefits of neighboring, we call it. that the city sees as valuable, and so they invest in it through the neighborhoods branch at the city.
All right, wonderful. And I should have said at the beginning, this is being recorded. If anybody doesn't want to appear, I think you probably can turn off your screen. At any rate, we're hoping that we can use it in other places for instruction about how to be a really good connector or finder of connectors. So thanks, Howard. It's a very trenchant, but effective framework for us to understand. So on at least 60 blocks, you have connectors, and one of those connectors is Penny Tucker. And so Penny, you and I agreed on some an outline of what you would share with us. So why don't you take over?
Okay, and do you have the questions that you can ask me each time? That would be helpful, as we're in the process of deconstructing our house, and I don't have the questions in front of me right now. I know the first one is, how did you get involved in being a connector?
Yes.
And so my community volunteer group, the board, decided that they wanted to have people connecting at the block level. So they put out an ad in the newsletter, and I responded to that ad and actually took on the role of neighborhood connector. But since I'm focusing in on the block connector for you today, I can speak to that. And so for my own block, I decided to use that as a training ground for getting familiar with abundant community and neighboring, and also how to train my other block connectors in the neighborhood. So when I started out on my own block, I think the first thing that I will reflect on in retrospect is how important it is to be curious. Bring a lot of curiosity to who is there and what's going on for them. You know, are they having a desire to be volunteering? Is my voice bouncing back? Is it okay? It's okay? Okay. So just being curious about what kinds of things are going on for people and who's behind those doors. So the other thing that I did was I listened really carefully on my own block. So when I went in Edmonton, we have these cards. They're kind of like interview cards where you ask neighbors, what is your vision for the neighborhood? What kinds of interests do you have? What kinds of abilities do you have that you would like to share with others? And not only does that help us connect people on the block with shared interests, but it helps us connect people in the whole neighborhood that way too. It also gives us their contact information, and it also gives us a darn good excuse to just knock on their door and introduce ourselves. So the first thing that I would say when I would ring the doorbell would be, and I learned this from Howard, which was, hello, I'm your neighbor from just over there. And right away that disarmed people. They didn't think I was a salesperson. They weren't concerned that I was there to collect money or anything. And I really didn't have anybody turn me away at all. It was so easy when I introduced myself as your neighbor. So does that answer that question? Where would you like me to go from there?
Well, as you talk to people, you have these sort of guiding questions, right, about what are their interests or
Yes.
or skills,
Yes.
and they are on a card that you use, correct?
Yes.
And so anybody who wants to see Howard, well, could you send to the people who are here a sample of that card when we're done? Is Howard turned off?
I can. Yeah, I can.
Okay, good.
I
So,
have a slide if you want to see it right now.
okay, why don't you do that? That sounds good.
Okay, can I share my screen?
Sure, I guess.
I don't know if it won't let me.
Won't let you. Okay. Well,
I
anyway,
have to ask the host.
it's very simple.
Yes.
Mhm.
And so can you tell us the kinds of responses you get? What are
Yeah.
people, you ask them 3 or 4 things. What are your interests? What are your, do you know what
Yeah.
those categories are? What
Yeah,
are
the first one is, what is your vision for our neighborhood? And at first, people do have a hard time answering that. I find that you have to prompt them with something like, what would you like to see more of in our neighborhood? Or what's kind of bugging you here? Or what do you think makes a great neighborhood? Those kinds of things. And then we ask, what are your interests or hobbies? And what kinds of abilities do you have that you might like to share with the rest of the neighborhood? And so just one example that came up, I was speaking to a lady and she was a retired music teacher. So, and often people are shy when you ask them, what are your abilities? People don't think they're talented. They don't think they're skilled. So, but if you keep sort of probing, like, you know, oh, so what, you're a retired music teacher, do you think you'd like to help teach some kids some music in the neighborhood? She said, oh no, I'm done with all that. I can't do that anymore. So I left that alone. And we continued to chat. And as I was leaving the door, she said, oh, wait a second. I want to show you this thing that I just sewed. And she went into the other room and she brought this beautiful blouse that she had sewed. And I said, you are a sewer? This is a beautiful blouse. You have the ability to sew. Would it be okay if I put this down on your card that you can sew? And she said, oh, sure. It lights her up. She was tired of the music teaching, but the sewing really lit her up. And so fast forward to COVID times, and on the next block, we had an ICU doctor who came to me and said, do you know anybody who embroiders? Because I'm on the ward, and my lead person says they can't tell who I am with all my gear on, and I need to get my name embroidered onto my scrubs. And I said, I know someone who sews. So I was able to connect the lady who sews with the lady who needed, the doctor who needed her scrubs embroidered on. And that was right here within the neighborhood. Someone offering something, someone needing something, bringing those together is what this is all about.
What, Penny, what kinds of, I'm thinking here quantitatively, you leave the average person's place, you've asked a bunch of things about things that they have, let's say, that could be contributed in the neighborhood, whether it's a skill and interest, etc. How many things do you usually walk away with? What would be the average?
On one household?
Yeah.
For skills that people are offering?
Or any of the other things that you're asking about?
Well, I would say on average you get 2 to 3 interests.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of abilities, it's really hit or miss. I would say if you get 1 from a household, that's pretty solid. Like we had an environmental engineer who had just retired, and she said, oh, I'd like to go on the sustainability committee. And it just so happened that our sustainability committee lead had just said, I can't do this anymore. So it was serendipitous. That's the other thing. All kinds of magic happens in this whole realm.
So let's imagine that you get 3 or 4 things, a piece of information from each household, right? And you go back home,
Yes.
and you have these cards. And
Yes.
let's say you have 10 cards and you got 4 things from everybody, you got 40 things, right? That they told you. What do you do? What do you do with that? How do you work it?
Well, the first thing that I do is I want people to come together so they can intermingle and learn about those skills and abilities by talking to each other first. We did eventually get it into a database, but and we're working with it slowly. But the things that stood out, we acted on right away. Where the sustainability lady got put on the committee right away. The sewing lady got hooked up with the lady who needed embroidery and all those kinds of things. But the first thing really was to get neighbors together for a social and have some fun and talking and just gathering, meeting each other, getting to know each other's faces and building trust and familiarity.
And do you tend to have this gathering after you've gone door to door or before?
We tend to have the gathering after we go door to door. So the card actually has a little section where you can rip it off and use it as a party invitation. So when you're talking to people at the door, you can say, this little section, that section that Howard has, it says, I'm having a party on Sunday. This is the day and time, and here's my contact information. May I please get your contact information? And you can rip it off, give it to them. And it's, it's an extension of goodwill that you've given them your contact information, so that then it's easier for them to give you theirs as well. So it's a good way to get the information, but it's also a good way to get them to come to a party as well. I've even taped those invitations to mailboxes when I couldn't get a hold of people. And I've had people show up to parties, believe it or not, of someone that they didn't know, an invitation taped to a mailbox. And that's a whole other story. Like, some amazing things happen with that too. So.
And at the party, do you have any kind of activity planned, or is it just come, eat something, drink something, and meet somebody?
So last year we had a lot of parties on a lot of blocks in our neighborhood. This year it's a bit different, but we've still had some. But last year it was, the whole guiding principle was to keep it really simple for the host and really non-committal and sort of free-flowing for the attendee. So it would often be just an hour and maybe a drop-in, like a drop-by, so that it's not this big, heavy RSVP situation where people have to hold this date tightly. Because the truth is, as neighbors, we just see each other coming and going, so let's just keep that going with the party atmosphere too. So the first social I had was January 27th of last year, freezing cold because Edmonton's cold, and it was on my front walkway, hot chocolate. Everybody came bundled up, hoods up, and here we were. I don't know, there were probably about 12 of us just meeting each other, drinking hot chocolate, and it didn't matter that there wasn't an activity. It was just that we were all being pioneers by being outside in the cold, and that started bonding us. In fact, my next door neighbor said, "This will be the coolest." He was coolest social that we'll ever have. In time, yes, very, very funny guy. So
that's great. And do you have you found on your block, for instance, one or two other people who you sort of work with in this activity, or do you still just do it alone?
Yes, that's actually been, I think, the thing I'm proudest of is, so I was really experimenting on my block last year for the first 4 or 5 months. So I kind of took Howard's lead and I started doing monthly social. We did potlucks or backyard things or anything. And in doing that, I started finding other people who were super social, and those were some of the gifts that they had to offer in this whole ABCD thing. Finding out people, I want to host and I want to host. So we've had people on our block. We've had 1, 2, 3. We've had 5 different households host socials and after we kind of built the muscle of neighboring on our block for the first 4 months. And so then out of that, I found 2 block connectors to take over my block because I'm doing the neighborhood too. So, and they're just on fire about it. They're great.
Good, good.
One even hosted a Zoom make granola together during COVID block social.
That's great.
He's amazing. Yeah.
So they have taken up the responsibilities that you had, and that
Yeah,
allows
I my nose in there.
and that it's a tricky thing. How did you transfer the responsibility that you had taken to these other 2? Can you tell us a little more about that? How did you get them to take over?
Well, we were at a potluck at a third party's house, and we had actually adopted another bit of a definition of a block for us, which is our back alley neighbors. So for the first 4 months, it was just our street and the neighbors across the street. And then from May onward last year, we took on our back alley neighbors, which were about 9 houses. And that's where the firecracker came from. One of the ladies behind us, it was very clear to me that that she was appropriate for this type of work, and my next door neighbor also wanted to be involved. So I just asked them at the potluck. I kind of said, "Hey, you 2, come on over here. Let's have a little chat," and they were thrilled. So, and they've done great work ever since. How did I pass it off? I mean, to tell, I'll be honest with you, it's been a little bit hard for me, like not being too involved on my own block because I'm so passionate about it on my own block. So they have to remind me now and then to get my nose out of it.
And can you give us an example or 2 of what they've done since they took over?
Yes.
Have they made some matches?
Yeah, so the first one that the firecracker lady from my back alley did was she shares a driveway with her neighbor. So they had just a spontaneous 2 driveway, kind of wine and cheese right out on the driveway. And she hand delivered invitations to everybody's mailboxes. And it was just super simple, 1 hour drop by. I think she put it out 3 days ahead of time, and people didn't have to commit, they could just show up. And we actually had another guy drive by on his bike who stopped, got off his bike, said hello to everybody. It sounded like Iranian, and he came over and he started eating her scones and visiting with everybody. So this was an extended sense of community. It was a good bonding experience for all of us because no one knew him, but we all brought him in anyway. Anyway, she did that, and my other block connector did an apple night last fall. So she took the apples from her neighbor's yard and did baked apples, just as simple as that. Come over for baked apples. And everybody, it was just wildly popular, and everyone came and had a great time. And then the firecracker did a soup night one night, which was wonderful. She just made 2 huge pots of soup, and everyone, I think she said to bring your own bowls. Just, I'm not really, that was a thing in Edmonton for a while there, and I think Howard and St. Albert, but anyway, so everyone came over, and it was nice because there's kids there and teenagers and older people. You know, we have one woman who's lost her husband last year, and we have teenagers there who are running in and out. And, you know, a lot of middle-aged folks like my husband and I, so enjoying all of it. And so those are some of the things that we've done.
One last question. Sometime you've had the socials, and sometimes you've made the connection like the doctor and the sower. Right?
Yes, yeah.
that's one-on-one.
Yeah.
Have you been able to create any, as a result of the information you've gathered, any groups of people, 3 or
Yeah.
4
Yeah.
people who've come together now around something? Can you have an example of that?
I do. So the lady that I've lived across the street from for 17 years, little did I know that she used to be a cop. So, so she and a few others on my block formed a security committee. And so that was really neat. Yeah. And one of the things we did last year that was quite profound actually was we found a lady who's a psychotherapist in our neighborhood. And last year at the time, I had just come off about a decade of some pretty heavy loss and grief. I was just explaining to her that it was a difficult time. And she said, wow, I do a lot of grief work. And I said, oh, well, would you like to do a workshop on that at my house? And so she was able to offer that specialty. And we had 12 people show up from our neighborhood who didn't know each other, who didn't know what the technique was going to be, who didn't know the psychotherapist. They took a leap of faith and came to this group grieving workshop, and it was profound. So, yeah. Oh, but I had another one too. We have we found a senior couple who, when I did her card at her door, she had said, we really need rides. Like I can't drive my husband, he's sick, and I can't figure out the parking machine at the hospital. I can't. I have to go out of the community to hire a cab. And she was disgusted by that. She said, I used to drive all my neighbors in the old days everywhere that they needed, and now I don't have anybody. And so, you know, I just said to her, Mabel, we just didn't know you needed help. We just didn't know that. So with the contact information that we had gathered from doing the cards, we have, within a 3-block radius of Mabel, we put out a notification that said, you know, we have a senior couple who would appreciate rides. Is there anybody who would be willing to go on a list to provide occasional rides? In 24 hours, we had 12 people step up to give those rides and be on that list. And it was a real moment in our community, because for years our community board had said they can't find volunteers for anything.
Yeah.
So,
Wonderful.
yeah.
Great. So you've if I hear you, you're saying you've done a lot through setting up socials, and actually you've done them almost monthly. You've gathered information that allows you to put one-on-one people together, where one of them can do something that would be useful to another.
Mm-hmm.
You brought people together as a group who are interested in doing something, for instance, about the block security. You brought a person from the neighborhood who could be a teacher together with other neighbors. So the therapist, right?
Yes.
So that on your own neighborhood, you found your own teachers. So some of you have an array of activities that you've done. Well, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Let's move on to Karen Wilk. And Karen is a person who has been a community connector, of course, first, I suppose, but has also taken on the responsibility of finding connectors on many blocks. And I know we run into so many people who say, but how can I find connectors? That always seems to be the threshold issue. They can't figure out how would you do that. So we've got a a PhD in doing that, Karen Wilkes. So Karen, why don't you tell us how we don't know, we want to know, how can we find connectors? What's the process?
I wouldn't say it's a formal process, but we've certainly learned a few things that seem to work well. First of all is actually being present in your neighborhood, just walking about, meeting and greeting people, talking to a neighbor on the street and saying, so who knows everybody on this block? And there's always, they'll point to a house and go, oh yeah, that's Jude. She's lived there for 37 years and she knows everything that's going on in the neighborhood. They're likely a natural connector. So we talk with that person. So that would be the first thing. When we began in my neighborhood, we hosted a breakfast workshop, so free food, and we opened it up to the whole neighborhood, and we probably had about 35 people come. They were curious, so we cast a vision for it, explained the initiative, and that's how we started with getting a good number of block connectors. And we've done a similar event every year of that kind, where we've just said, come on and find out more about what this Abundant Community Edmonton initiative is all about, what a block connector does, and meet some block connectors and so on if you're not familiar with it. And then we have a regular newsletter and an e-blast, and I use social media quite a bit. So we're always sharing block connecting stories there, and giving tidbits on why neighborhood is important and why connecting with each other creates and nurtures a community of care that's better for everyone. And those come from all different people, from block connectors, from those who've joined a group in the neighborhood, as well as from myself. And that creates some energy and interest and inspiration. And we have a lot of community events which block connectors encourage their blocks to participate in, like a harvest fair and monthly potlucks and winter carnival and so on. And we have what we call our Lucy booth. Are any of you familiar with Charlie Brown and Lucy? And she has this booth and she says, psychologist in, lawyer in, and basically she's just trying to get money from Charlie Brown and so on. So ours just says block connector in, and that goes to all of these kinds of events. And it's actually quite fun, quite engaging, and people are curious about it if they're new to the neighborhood. So that's another way we recruit block connectors, actually. But I would say now the best way to get block connectors is for block connectors, my block connectors. So they tell a neighbor on another block over, oh, I'm the block connector and we're doing all these things and it's so much fun and I love what's happening. And so it's block connector finding block connectors finding other block connectors. That seems to be at this point in our journey anyways the most effective way of finding them.
That's a wonderful array of possibilities. Tell us what in, I don't know, 3-4 minutes, you must have to explain over and over again what a block connector is and does to people, right? Can you tell what you say? You must have learned a good way of describing it that will interest people. How do you give us the pitch?
Well, we actually use the pitch that's on the card most of the time. We say, well, a block connector is a party person, a point person, and a listener. And so as a party person, they're the ones who may not host, as Penny said, every single event, but they're bringing people together to get to know one another, to socialize, to create a sense of connection and community. And again, as Penny talked about, that happens in all kinds of different ways, from small and big get-togethers. And I'm often asked, well, don't you have to be an extrovert for this? We actually have some block connectors who would call themselves more introverted. So their way of being a party person is having 2 or 3 neighbors over for a cup of tea in the backyard. So it doesn't have to be this big splashy party thing. However, that block connector then, as the party person, will find the person in the neighborhood who is the partier, so to speak, and get them involved in organizing that piece of it. Then as the point person, we talk about how you're going to be connected as a block connector with everything that's going on at the bigger neighborhood level. So you're going to be kind of a liaison with the community as a whole, and also on the block. So don't you already know that so-and-so down the street have a dog named Max? And when the other neighbor tells you that Max is out and missing or whatever, they're connecting at that street level as well. You left your garage door open. There's somebody going around the neighborhood trying to break into every car, or, you know, whatever it might be. You're a point person at that personal neighbor to neighbor level, and also at the bigger community connection level. And then the last one, listener. The more a block connector gets to know their neighborhood, the more that just happens. So the first piece of the listening is what Penny described when we were looking at the card. You're listening to what they think is important in the neighborhood. You're listening to discover what their interests and abilities and assets are. But then you're also listening for where they're at in life, and what life experiences connect them with others in the community. And through that, many block connectors become quite a support person, or at least the person who facilitates care for others, like Penny's example of getting rides. People who lose a loved one, who's lost their job, people who've gone through infertility, and then we find out another couple that's struggling with that, and we connect them together. So it really nurtures this care for one another, which is beautiful. And inclusiveness would be another piece of that, I think. So the block connectors, we say it's human scale, as Howard mentioned. So we aren't expecting you to get to know everyone in the neighborhood, just the people on your street or block or apartment floor. We are working at supporting you as a block connector too. So you're not just going out there on your own, but you're going to be part of a network of care as well. So that was a long answer to that question, John.
Oh, but very useful. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, just to add to what Karen was saying, what we say is that as the point person, you're going to help create a sense of a village on your block. And we even have a map, a block map graphic that has all the houses on it. And then we put the names and phone numbers matched to each house so that people can look at it and say, oh, that's where Ron and Gail live. That's where Sandy lives. That's where Margot lives. That's where Penny lives. And they can actually put it in their mind that way.
Yeah, and the point person holds all that information.
I'm unmuting here.
No problem, John.
No, now you've done this enough. You're looking for people who are connectors, and I know we've been asked many times, do you train connectors, or do you find people and say we'll train you to be a connector? And I may be wrong, but I think we've consistently said no. There are connectors on every block, right? And the issue is not training them, it is finding them, right? And so I wonder if you have a way in your own mind, you now have dealt with a lot of people. Some of them might not have been very good connectors, even though you call them a connector. So, and a lot of them have been very good, but you have a little profile in your mind that you could describe as to what kind of a person or persons, kinds of persons, tend to be really good at being a connector.
Sure. Well, they're naturally connecting, right? So they're people. I would say another characteristic is that they're going to be available. They're hanging out in the neighborhood. They're not so busy in their clubs or work or other places. So in that sense, that they're valuing the place where they live, and appreciating that and recognizing that there's something of benefit worth investing in here. Occasionally we've had people that are already too busy and they like the idea, but they really don't put anything into it. I think another one is that they're kind of willing to take a risk, to say hello, to take the initiative. They're, Penny used the word curious about people and interests and so on. And clearly they enjoy getting people together, making that happen. When you asked me to think about that question, John, I kind of went through my list of block connectors and was kind of surprised at this characteristic, that my one thing in common with the major number of people, one thing they had in common was that they worked at home, or they were only part-time employed, which I thought was kind of interesting. I hadn't realized that. We have quite a few couples who don't have children who are, as a couple, involved as block connectors. We also have a lot of recently retired, or some not so recently retired, block connectors who are, out in their gardens and around. And then in the younger age group, we have stay-at-home parents who've also been quite instrumental in getting some groups going, like a TOTS play group, which is a really interesting group, because now we've got them connected with the seniors home in our neighborhood. We have 250 seniors with assisted care right through to full-time care. And they actually have the play group now at the seniors home in their, not during COVID, in their open area. And that has just been so fantastic for the kids and the seniors who are often isolated and don't see children. So that's another group or a characteristic of some of our block connectors as well.
And lastly, because we ought to see if there are people who want to ask you questions as well, you have to support the people you find, right? I mean, you're a finder. And how many people would you say you found and are supporting at this point?
So we have a fairly large list of block connectors, and as you pointed out, some are more engaged and involved than others. And we have a monthly block connector gathering. Lately it's been on Zoom. And now not everyone comes every month, but that's sort of a coffee time, share stories, ask questions. We usually have a little article to discuss on community building. And we also use that as a time to make sure people know what's going on in the neighborhood. So that's an important piece of supporting the block connectors, and for them to, peer-to-peer encouragement. Oh, what did you do when your neighbor did this? Or, we work together in that way. I think another piece of the support is that our neighborhood community league, neighborhood volunteer association, is very supportive and very involved by making sure that that's profiled in our e-blasts on social media and the newsletters and so on. And then via Howard and the city, we have lots of resources for our block connectors, and they make good use of those. They get neighboring cards, the conversation starters that Howard held up, and so on. All of that, I think, is part of the support for our block connectors.
Wonderful. Well, I'm sure that, oh, go ahead. Yes.
Okay, no, I was just going to say, along the same lines as Karen doing the block connector Zoom meetings, we had two distanced block connector socials on our front lawn, and we just measured out the seating so that everybody felt secure, and they brought their own drinks. But what I was going to say is, at that one, we actually did a speed neighboring activity so that because the other component is for them to get to know each other and build a community within the community. So the speed neighboring was just a table that had them 6 feet apart, and they could rapid fire questions at each other for 3 minutes and get to know each other. So that was beautiful.
I'll just add one other piece that's only been going for, I don't know how many months has Nextdoor been around in Edmonton now, Howard. The Nextdoor app, we have a block connector group on there, and all of our block connectors, not all of them have done it yet, are making their own block, a group on the Nextdoor app as well. And all of the groups, associations that have come out of the block connectors getting to know their neighbors are also being put on that app. And I would encourage you to use that, or encourage your neighborhoods to use that, so that, you know, our Talking Gardens group, our walking group, our cigar herf. Did you know that are a group of people who smoke cigars? It's called a herf. We found 9 cigar smokers in our neighborhood, and they get together now. And so on.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, let me, at this point, this has been just wonderful what you've shared, open things up and ask whether there are the other participants in this discussion have questions that you'd like to raise.
Hey, I'm Patrick from Historic Central Neighborhood in Appleton, Wisconsin. And is everything right now on hold due to COVID? When you're talking about what's going on in activities and gatherings, are all those on hold during the COVID?
Not for us. We've had backyard distance gatherings that block connectors have arranged for their blocks. We've had one, we did a movie night. They put an old-fashioned white sheet on the back of their house, and they projected a movie onto it, and they had everyone distanced to watch it with popcorn. We had that Zoom granola making block social. So she sent out a recipe for granola, and we all got our ingredients ahead of time. And then we got on Zoom and we made the granola while we were chatting. And it really wasn't about the granola at all. It was about visiting and seeing each other again. And it lasted double the length of time it was booked for, believe it or not. People were so hungry to socialize. And then we've had 2 wine on front pad distanced, thrown together at the last minute, just because we did those cards and we have that contact information. People can email each other and say, hey, let's do it tonight on my lawn. You know, we'll put the wine on the table and it's been sterilized, and you can bring your own glass and be careful with distancing and pour your, you know, so there's no cross-contamination. People are sterilizing, and so far so good. So
yeah, our Historic Central Neighborhood has pretty much put everything on hold where we meet physically. I do meet with neighbors individually on my front lawn, but not as groups. I don't meet with them as groups. I meet with maybe 1 or 2 at a time. And I also chat with them during my neighborhood walks. But again, I'm wearing my mask and we keep our distance, etc. But everything else that we've done where it's person to person, we've actually just shut it down and put on hold. We do have a Zoom mingle that we do every month. And of course, that we don't need to gather person to person, so we meet on Zoom with that. But other than that, that's about all that's going on right now with us.
What about for you?
Lots of our stuff is shut down. And I would say for the first month, nobody dared to do anything. There was such a strict sense of quarantining and so on. But you know, we're in whatever phase 2 or 3 now here, so things are opening up. But one of the things that amazed me was how creative people became. So we have a number of book clubs, and they took the initiative to do that online. And have a wonderful time. So there's been some intuitive and creative ways that different block connectors have taken up the opportunity. And they've also been really good at putting notes in mailboxes where they know seniors live, and creating that care, that help. We'll buy groceries, we'll get you to get your prescriptions for you. There's an awful lot more happening, and a willingness to have it happen with the help piece through the COVID time.
Just want to warn all the people in the States, don't put anything on any of the mailboxes unless it's delivered by a mailman, because it's illegal in the States. So,
Really? Can you you could put a personal letter in though, right? You could put a
no,
card
you can't put anything in the mailbox that isn't delivered by a federal a postal worker. If the postal worker finds anything in the mailbox attached to the mailbox, he contacts the whatever the person is, and it's usually me in my neighborhood. I get the phone call from the post office and telling us, hey, listen, what's going on over there in that neighborhood again? You know, you can't put anything or attach anything or put anything in our mailboxes. That's a federal box.
Yeah.
No, tell your people, stop it.
That's
Really? You got to change that law, among other things, down there.
that's where it's really handy to have done the cards to get people's email addresses on your block. And I was going to just mention, in terms of being creative, like one of my block connectors was a fitness instructor, and in the first 2 weeks of quarantine in March, she held an outdoor fitness class right on our street, and everybody was about 10 feet apart, and she was leading this, fitness class. And actually, it wasn't about fitness at all, but we were moving our bodies, and it felt good, but we were, at the same time, we all knew we were quelling our fears about COVID, and we were connecting with each other. There was no on our street. Like, it was a very unique kind of experience that was uplifting, and she was very creative and brave in leading them.
Yeah, Wisconsin was down to 2.5% of cases showing up with COVID. Now we're at 5.6. So we went in reverse. They opened everything up. They didn't stay to the protocols that were put out early, and now we're seeing a big surge in sickness and death.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? A question? Something you'd like to?
No, I'll just point out an opportunity that we've seen during COVID is people want to care and they want to help, and they particularly want to help seniors. That's the framework. And they usually say we want to help get groceries or medication for seniors. And so we've taken, we've had to have an ABCD twist on that, which says everybody is gifted and capable. And the way we've done that is we've encouraged people, if they could, to update, so we even use this language, update your contact list on your block. So of course you're thinking, well, most people don't have a contact list. Well, that's inconsequential to us. We want to say, no, we believe you should have a contact list, and we'll give you the benefit of the doubt believing you do have a contact list. So you update it. And the other thing that we've done is don't tell you how to update it. We don't, because that's not in the, in the realm of our power. You have to figure out how to update your list. And the fact that it's just a contact list also points out that even that senior next to you who may have a need is only put on the list as a contributor, right? The list is a list of contributors. Now, it also serves as a list whereby you can ask for help as well. But that's not how we lead.
Vicky?
Yes, I had a question.
Good.
I am currently doing a lot of asset discovery in my neighborhood. The reason that we started it was to connect or find out what neighbors are interested in, what they're knowledgeable about, what they care about, so we could connect those with young people in the neighborhood, particularly at an elementary school and at a Boys and Girls Club. But I'm finding the way we have the questions worded are very hard for neighbors to answer. So I'm just wondering, what kind of questions do you use that get the most response from people, or that you don't really have to prompt them, so you get the same answers all the time? I noticed on the card that Howard held up, the question says, activities or interests you would enjoy with neighbors. Is that how it's stated?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so with that question, you're able to get what they're interested in or what they have knowledge of already?
So, well, my experience is that says it gets to the core of what their interests and hobbies are, because most people will come out with, oh, you know, I've always thought about going on a walking group, or actually the very first card I ever did on my blog was my next door neighbor. I pounced on him. He was shoveling his snow, and John, will you be my first card? And his response to what would you be interested in doing with other neighbors was to do a Mandarin course. He wanted to learn Chinese, which, you know, is very rare. But my point is that came out of the recesses of his mind as something that was a key interest for him. So I think that's a good question. What are you interested in that you would do with other people? I think that one's yielded the best answers for me.
But the second question gets at, I think, what you're looking for a bit more, maybe, Vicki, and that is what skills, abilities do you have that you can contribute to the neighborhood?
Okay.
You'd be willing to contribute to the neighborhood.
Okay, so
and then we get everything from, I'd be willing to help on the facilities team and cut the grass at the community hall, or we get, well, I am a grief counselor, as Penny suggested, and there's a huge spectrum of what people are willing to contribute. But I would say our cards, at least for me and for the block connectors I work with, the key, I always say, this is about the conversation. So you're curating a conversation. The questions are just prompting that. And I think that maybe there's a bit of skill involved in that, which is part of what we, you know, coach our block connectors in. You know, how do you get that conversation going so people's light bulbs go off a little bit more than, oh, I don't have any talents, I don't have anything to contribute, you know, that common narrative.
That's the question that I found the most awkward, because and the one that needed the most prompting, because most people don't think they have skills or anything to contribute.
Right. And so when I'm doing my asset discovery, the way we have 3 questions. What are some things that you or others in the household are good at doing with your hands? What are some things you know a lot about? And the third one is, what are some things that you really care about or could imagine working on with others? I just have people that are just really stumped at those questions, and I can understand, because I just think they're very formal, and I'm just trying to figure out a different way to ask them to get more information, I guess. So I was just trying to see if you could help me with that, or maybe with the coaching, like you said, maybe if you have like a document or some things that you follow on how to coach a conversationalist, maybe that would help me. I don't know.
Overwhelmingly, Vicki, we hear block connectors say, I don't really want to ask these questions until I build a bit of a relationship with my block. So they really resist going right away. Now, you can, if you're like me, you can say, oh no, it'll be fine, just go for it and see what happens. But we also want to say to people, there's no rush on this. You're on the block over a long period of time. This isn't a one and done operation. So you may be with someone, like on this particular card, this is the family, and I didn't get any answers yet. And that's okay. Because, you know, I went to them because my neighbors were complaining already about this new family. So there was, you know, I was so fun to go back to them and describe, oh no, this is a wonderful family. It's gonna be such an enhancement to our neighborhood. And Lila, who's 9 years old, is gonna become a friend of Scarlett, who's 8. Isn't that exciting? So it's not a program or a one and done initiative. This is building a supportive social unit at the block level, and then hopefully at the neighborhood level. So I hope Lila and Scarlett can find other 8 and 9-year-olds in the neighborhood. But I also know that this is going to form a supportive social unit for James, who happens to be a Harley fan. And I already know there's 5 other people in the neighborhood. And the reason why I know he's a Harley fan is because he had a Harley t-shirt on. So you can just begin to get to know a person through the natural processes. And as Penny again mentioned earlier, if your block connectors are curious, like I'm curious, I can't wait to find out what is going on and who these people are. So I'm going to find that information. I'm going to document it. I'm going to let them know. Well, they're already excited about giving me their information because I mentioned we're going to do this. So I didn't take the information, but I told them I was going to.
And just to build on that, the other thing I noticed is the importance of listening. So not just sticking with the cards. If they start talking about something else, go with that and follow that train of thought. And it's amazing where that will take you. So even like on my block, people were saying, I'm so embarrassed. I know her name, but I don't know his name. And when I went to bed that night, that's how our block map graphic was created, was to say everybody will now know each other's name.
Yeah.
So it was a tool that's been widely used in our neighborhood that has been not only helpful in learning each other's names, but it's when someone receives this grouping of the houses as a graphic, they go, I belong. I didn't know I belonged, but I belong somewhere. And so it's so much more than just names. But the point being is listening to what people, really listening to what they're saying and trying to build something out of that.
I'll just echo. Oh, sorry, John.
I was just going to say another thing that I've seen that really gets that sense, oh, I belong, is if somebody does get information about what people are willing to contribute, any of those, and from any of those questions.
Yeah.
And you put them all down on a sheet, all right? And then just say, here are things people in this neighborhood have said they'd like to contribute, and just distribute it. Don't tell their names. I mean, if you're interested, contact. But the sense that I am in a different place than I ever imagined, that grows from distributing just the information that you collect, what people have to offer, is, I think, in one little document, the best community identifier.
So here's an example of exactly what you're talking about, and during COVID times. So another new neighborhood connector in a neighborhood just south of me just got started, and I was coaching her about some of the things that worked well in our neighborhood, and one of the things I said to her and encouraged her to do was to hold her social immediately so that she could train herself. And what she did was she held a back alley social distanced, and she did exactly what you just suggested, John. She took all the comments from the cards and she put them on Bristol board, and she pasted them to the fences in the back alley, and everyone could read what it is that connected them. And they felt
Yeah.
so much a sense of belonging from that.
That
That's
loud,
great.
Patrick?
Pardon me? Didn't hear that.
Any other questions from other people? Haven't had a chance yet? Anybody?
I was one. Oh, I just wondering if you see any trends or patterns in terms of socioeconomic, like are there certain obstacles in suburban neighborhoods as opposed to obstacles in urban neighborhoods, or anything like that you're noticing? Or is it?
Howard would probably be better to speak to that.
Yeah. Howard, what about it?
Yeah, well, this it goes back a little bit to what we said around the common denominators among block connectors. So one of the common denominators or an approach that we have with block connectors is you deal with, you've only got 20 households and you're trying to find a point person on that block, a block connector. So you have to go with what you got. That's a selection from 20 households. So the capacity may not be as high in some neighborhoods as others. So you may have to be more patient. You need to be supportive over a longer period of time. But that would be the only difference. You'll always find people who are willing, for sure, very passionate. I don't think there's a difference in passion. I don't think there's a difference in willingness, but there may be a bit of a difference in capacity to organize and just get it done. But that's okay. It just means we're a little slower.
Others?
I just have a small question. The Lucy booth, the block connectors in, I was just trying to visualize what was happening in that booth.
So at our bigger neighborhood events and at block parties and so on, we have that booth set up saying, at the top has Abundant Community Laurier, that's our neighborhood name. And then a block connector is in, and that would be me or one of our block connectors. And people who are unfamiliar with what's going on with it, people who don't know who their block connector is, who are interested in being a block connector, it becomes kind of a focal point for conversation. And we actually often have block connectors who do those little interviews, have those conversations with the cards at that booth as well, so that we're collecting that contact info and, you know, the abilities and interests of the neighbors. So it's just kind of a focal point for this initiative, and we try and have it up at all kinds of different events.
I just want to, I think Penny and Karen both could advocate, and Penny already has, the power of a graphic, of a map with people's names on it that you can show individuals. If you're, and this is Karen's first thing, strolling around the neighborhood, being present in the neighborhood. If you're a neighborhood connector and you're walking around the neighborhood and you have a map of, well, there's Karen's. So those are so powerful when you have the names and people say, well, I can do this on my block. And I see Larry and Marlene and Gordon are all block connectors. This sounds fun. And as Penny said also, or was it another meeting I was in earlier today, block connectors then get to know other neighbors who are block connectors, which is also kind of fun. That's another, a group or an association in the neighborhood is the association of block connectors. We'll also have another association that we think is quite important, the association of support team. Keeping this moving, we think it's very helpful to have a support team of individuals that just are determined to keep this moving in the neighborhood, so that it's not just a Howard, a Penny, or a Karen, but you've built a support team of people who are willing to, by hook or by crook, make sure this continues on in the neighborhood.
Yeah, I have a question about that. I was reading one of the books, I can't remember which one it was. They were talking about building blocks and block connectors. And they said that they hired someone and paid them $10,000 a year as a base for their connecting and a base for all of their information. Is that still going on?
Yeah, we don't know. There's lots of qualifications in that. The first one is it's a one-time At this point, it's always been just one time. It's $10,000 and it can be split. We see that happening too. It can be one person. So yes, we don't push it, but we allow it to emerge. There is the opportunity for them to apply for a grant.
Yeah, it's a provincial grant.
All right. Maybe later on, Howard, we might get together once again and have you share more about the kinds of things that go on in addition to the connector and the connector finder, the support teams, and maybe also what you found governments can do that are helpful but not intrusive or cooperative or colonial. So maybe you'd be up for doing that. Would people be interested in one more of these that had that kind of a focus, that asked what else is supportive and useful for people who are at the local level? That sound, for those of you in the US, would that be helpful? Anybody?
Yes, yes. After listening to the conversation here too, I think that I have block connectors I didn't even know I had, that actually meet with me on a regular basis and tell me what's going on in their neighborhood and how they're working with their neighbors. So, you know, I can now make a list of people that are probably block connectors that I didn't even realize were block connectors, but they actually are doing the work.
Yeah. Show it to all of them. Make them into a group. Right. Like getting, yeah.
But
Let me go ahead.
No, I was just going to say to Vicki, I hope you've left with a couple of ideas about how to handle those tough questions. Like I think my overriding comment would be to just take those questions and rephrase them and reframe them so that the person's being asked, what do you enjoy doing with your free time? What is it that you're passionate about? What are your hobbies? Those are the types of prompts that I found would get the best response. And that's why the lady ran into the other room and grabbed her blouse. And that's how I knew that she was all lit up about sewing, even though she was a master music teacher. So just saying, you know, what have you been doing with your time lately? What are you interested in? What's going on? And so I think getting underneath that question is really important, and it takes it out of the formal realm that you were concerned about too.
It's very helpful. Yeah.
Good.
Let me add, I can't resist, one thing that we did talk about. One time years ago, I used to go around all kinds of countries that were initiating ABCD activities. And I was in Sweden, and I was in a development. Almost all the housing in Sweden is subsidized. There's 6,000 people, pretty nice, mostly apartments. And they had what I still remember as the most impressive ABCD connective organization I've ever run into. And they called themselves the Fire Souls. S-O-U-L-S, right? And the guy who started the thing said to put out a little thing, says, we're starting a group called Fire Souls, and we have these beautiful jackets that have the symbol of a fire soul on it. And if you'd like one, drop by this place where I am, and I'll tell you how to get one. And so he said, all you have to do to get one, and they are very nice, I have one, he said, is you have to do one thing that will make things better physically or socially here in the development. It's specific, but you'll do it. And so he got 10 people to do something in particular, and he gave them the jackets, And the jackets people began to ask, what is that jacket, right? And they became recruiters. They said, oh, all you have to do is do something to make this place better. And it grew and it grew. And they had over 1,000 people wearing the jackets by making small initiatives of any kind rewarded and visible in the person who had done it. So I was there, and it was, I mean, this was one of the most contributing communities I've ever run into. It was stunning to see how many people were involved and all the things they had done and how much it had lifted up the reality of this place. I don't speak Swedish, among other things, right? And so I was being told by this one man who started it about everything, and he'd introduce people and translate and that kind of thing. But then I found, just by happenstance, that almost all of the people who began this, the first 100 people, who were people, he said, who were in the neighborhood during the daytime.
Yeah.
And who was making that point about, yes, well, you understand, I think that's one of the most important things, because a lot of connectors work at night, right? And one of the things you may miss is what it powers a lot of these efforts, that is, people who are there in the daytime. So one thing you might add to the methods is make sure that what you're doing is finding out about everybody who's there at 10 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, because I think, Karen, you were saying they're your best bet.
Yeah.
So, well, anything else before we close? I want to.
John, how are those jackets paid for? Just out of curiosity.
That's an interesting question. They're rain jackets because it's Sweden and they're warm. They have this logo. The whole program was logoed, right, with a fire soul. Where did he get the money? Oh, I think he persuaded that every one of these developments in Sweden has a manager. And they're big not-for-profits that run these things. And so I think he persuaded them to give, pay for 10 of them to get it started. And but it also says there's something about this constant recognition of contribution going on visibly all of the time.
Yeah.
And so with people who have time and the visibility that they're using it to contribute, and built, I would say, the most peerless participatory activity I've ever seen.
That's really
So we're now an hour and a half long. And if we're going to use this as a recording, that may be about the attention span of most people. So let me thank you so much, our Canadian visitors, and of course the people who haven't been with us in the United States before. And if I may, I'd like to close with a tribute to Canada. I have spent maybe a third of my time in Canada, all out of proportion to the amount of time I've spent in the United States, about ABCD. And I would say that in Canada, people are much more cooperative and willing to contribute than tends to be the case in the United States. And I think it's a cultural phenomenon. I've wondered, because it seemed to me when I went to Canada, it was so easy to get things going, right, compared to in the US, right? And so I think it's a cultural phenomenon. I think here in the United States, we are more competitive and individualistic than people in Canada who are more cooperative and contributing. And so I have learned, and I want to give you this tribute, more from Canada than I have from here about what people can do when they come together with their own capacities and skills and gifts and say, we're going to build a better future here. So thank you for all of the knowledge and wisdom that I've gotten from you, and that's why I wanted to have all of us here share with what you've accomplished.
Thank you for today. Thank you for the opportunity. It's been wonderful to see you all and feel connected to y'all down south there. I will say, John, if you ever wanted to talk about training block connectors versus not, I would love to have that conversation with you.
Okay. You do training?
I do. I absolutely firmly
Okay.
believe it because they're volunteers, and I know all the friends of mine who are volunteers say if they show up to do something, if it's not organized and has some structure and has some direction and some vision, they don't want anything to do with it. They'll run as fast as they can, or they'll just do a really bad job.
There we go, Howard. That's the other part of the presentation for next time.
I have just one question for the Canadians on the line here. Are any of you adopting?
That's what I was going to say. We all want to come to Canada.
The more the merrier. Yes, yes, I'm all about adopting. Yes, yes.
I'm ready for adoption, so.
Okay, I love that.
Okay. Well, we'll try it again, and we'll learn about training, and we'll learn about support at other levels of society for what the connectors are doing. So it's been a wonderful afternoon. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Bring us together, John. Nice to meet you
Feel
all.
free to contact if you have any other questions. Please give my email out.
Sure. We can email
Best to you all. Yeah, for sure.
or call you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.